Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Eleanor and today I want to do my May reading wrap up. I managed to read a few books in May and I'm quite excited to share with you what they were. The first book I read was The Last Vampire by Christopher Pike. Now this is actually a bind up of two books, but I only read the first one because this is part of my reliving my teen vampire obsession series, which I'll leave linked below. I read two books for that series in the month of May, so they'll be included in this wrap up. So this first book's only like a couple hundred pages long, and it was fun rereading this. I was obsessed with vampires when I was in my early teens, and this is just a ridiculous story. It's a 5,000-year-old vampire. She's got all the money and all the power and she's perfect and all of that rot. I really appreciate in this book and in this series the inclusion of Hinduism. It's the main focal point, the main religion I should say, that is included in this series, and I feel like it's very well interwoven. It's much more common to have books like this feature Christianity, and it was just nice to see something different, and I'd forgotten when I was doing my reread that that was such a huge part of the story. So I really enjoyed that inclusion, and this was just fun and very nostalgic and a very quick read. The next book I read was Looking Glass by Christina Henry. This is part of the Chronicles of Alice duology, and this is 4 short novellas in one bind up. And so there's 4 of them. So one follows a little girl called Elizabeth, who, when you read the story, you find out why she's included and what her relevance to the story is. There's a story that just follows mostly Alice. There's a story that follows Alice and Hatcher together, and there's a story of Hatcher when he was a lot younger, before everything went wrong for him and before he met Alice. I really liked all these stories. Usually with bind-ups like this, there's some that you like more than others, but I feel like they all had a lot to bring to the table. I loved the expansion of this world. There was more violence, there was more problems to overcome, but I did like, especially in Hatcher's story, learning more about how the old city functioned, what it was like to actually live and work and try and survive in that culture. And I really enjoyed this collection, and I really thought it added a lot to the original duology. And I've also did a review video about it in particular, so I'll leave that linked below as well if you want some more information about it. But I really would recommend this series, and this edition is beautiful. It's got lovely sprayed edges, and I think mine's signed because I pre-ordered it from Waterstones, so it's lovely. The next book I read was Foundation by Isaac Asimov. Now, I didn't realise when I bought this that the way this series works is quite confusing. Like, this is technically the first published book, and it's perhaps the first place you should start, but Isaac Asimov wrote a few prequels to this and a few sequels, and some people debate whether you should read it chronologically or you should just read it in order of publication date. So it's widely debated, I'm sure. I had no idea. I assumed this was the first in the series, bought this, and I read this one. This is more classic sci-fi. I believe this was first published in the 1950s, so it's of an era of science fiction that is happening when the first sorts of humans in Earth are like travelling into space. And this is the first people delving into what science fiction looks like, what space travel looks like, what other planets look like. And I find those aspects of classic sci-fi really interesting because it's of an era, and I found it quite funny in this book that everyone still smoked cigarettes, everyone smoked cigars, which obviously isn't much a thing nowadays, but you can tell that this was written in like the 40s, 50s, 60s. That's the era that it was written by the author, where everyone smoked and it was commonplace. So even when you're in the depths of space and you're hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years in the future on other planets, on spaceships, these humans still smoke. I just thought it was really funny and like a really obvious detail that was just all the way throughout the book. I found this really interesting. I loved the concept, but I don't know if it's Isaac Asimov's writing style or the way he was trying to portray and explain this story. It didn't work for me. It was so political. There was a lot of time skipping. There's a lot of different characters, and for quite a while it's hard to actually understand what's going on, what the agenda is, what the purpose is. And I'll try not to spoil it if you're interested in reading this, but I wrote a Goodreads review, and there's maybe a bit more detail there if you're interested. But I just found that it was all just a bit too convenient. They were predicting things for the future, and the easiest term to say that's not how they explain it in the book. And everything just seems to kind of happen as you'd expect. Like, there was nothing surprising, there was nothing, everything just fell into place really easily and really conveniently. And I don't know, it was just far too political. It was all about the governments and people in power and lords and mayors and all that sort of stuff. And that's not usually what I like to read anyway. It was a really interesting concept, and I am glad I read it, because I do like delving into classic sci-fi. I just find it really fun to see the portrayal of spaceflight back in the day. The next book I read was Marked by PC and Christian Cast. Now, this was another one of my Reliving My Teen Vampire Obsession series. I'll leave this video linked below if you're interested in this one. This is a really long, this is like a 14 book series, and this is the first one. It's the House of Night series. This is another vampire story that I loved. I really enjoyed the concept. Vampires are known to the world, and there's schools for vampires, and you're turned into a fledgling, and you may or may not survive the change, and you go to school, and it's centred around, I don't know how to describe it, like Wiccan practices, where like you worship like the elements and along with a god. So you thank like the compass points, and you thank wind and the earth and the water and spirit and things like that. I'm not explaining that correctly. So I love that inclusion because it makes it more ritualistic and just adds another element to the story. But it's set in a school, a lot of teen drama, a lot of romance drama, even in this first book. And I remember that's prevalent throughout the whole series. It's just lots and lots of teen angst. So although it was fun to reread this first one, I'm not too keen on continuing rereading it. I'm far too old. I'm just not interested anymore. But this is a really fun series, and if you're in your teens and you're interested, like, I would recommend it. It is good fun. Yeah, it's just a great series. The next book I read was To Be Taught, If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. I don't have a physical copy of the book. I bought it on my Kindle. There was an Amazon Kindle deal where I got it for £1.99. So I took advantage of that and I bought it on Kindle instead of buying the physical copy, which I will do at some point because it was phenomenal. I'm sure if you've watched any of my videos, you know how much I praise Becky Chambers and the Wayfarer series. This is a standalone novella, and it packs a punch. You wouldn't imagine that it's only a couple of hundred pages. It's just so good. It's following this long-term spaceflight crew of 4 who are travelling to deep space, and although they will return home, because of the way the space flight travel works, they go into like a kind of status, and when they come back it'll be like 100 years have passed on Earth. So communication is very limited and years out of date when they get information to and from their ship, and they're exploring planets throughout the galaxy and checking for signs of life, checking for creatures and biology, and it's quite scientific with what they're trying to look for. I just found this really, really brilliant. It's just about these 4 people, these 4 astronauts, their relationships to each other, their scientific discovery. I loved the way this was written. I loved the main voice, and I believe it's also quite LGBTQ plus friendly, although it's not blatantly stated. I know that is the intent, and a few of the characters are like that, but it's not like a main focal point, it's just an undercurrent, and I'm sure we appreciate the inclusion. And I just loved this story. I loved the scientific descriptions of the other planets. I loved how everything was new and how detailed it was all described. In the end, I couldn't believe it was only 153 pages. It blew my mind. And the ending's just heart-wrenching. And it's just very, I don't know. You just have to read it. If you like Becky Chambers writing, you'll love this one as well. And the last book I read in May was Heroes by Stephen Fry. Not too long ago I read Stephen Fry's Mythos, and I really enjoyed that one. That one was more an overview of how the Greek titans and Greek gods came into being, how the world was created in terms of Greek mythology, and I really thought that book was fantastic. Stephen Fry is a brilliant writer, he's very engaging, and he makes everything quite, not simple to understand, but it is easy for the common reader to pick up and just be able to digest it, because a lot of Greek books, especially old ones, are maybe harder to understand. There's a lot of language in there that's quite old, and it's not easy to digest. Stephen Fry does make it easy to digest, and that is certainly true for Heroes as well. I have read a fair few books about Greek mythology, and this just didn't quite hit the mark with me, because I don't know if it's just because I am more familiar with the stories. There just wasn't really anything new to this. Stephen Fry tried to cram in everything in one book, and although it's a bigger book, it feels rushed. There's so many stories that are compounded down into only a couple of pages, and certain things are really breezed over, and it's just a shame that a lot of the stories that you'd want a lot of detail for are kind of glazed over and you don't really get a lot of them. In general, I really love Stephen Fry's writing style. I love how easy it is to read, and I did enjoy it. And if you have not read anything about Greek mythology before, this is so accessible, and I would definitely recommend this. But as someone who's read a fair bit about Greek mythology, like I love the Percy Jackson series, which, although has things changed, has a lot in it too. This just wasn't bringing anything new to the table for me as someone who's read a fair bit about Greek mythology before. So if you're new, this is definitely a place to start. But if you're looking for a more in-depth analysis, if you're looking for more detail, I really wouldn't recommend this. And as always, I've got my May bullet journal update for you. So this is all the books I read, what I rated them, and how many pages I read a day. You can tell I'm filming this a couple of days before the end of the month. So yeah, I like this. I feel like it keeps me on track with my reading, and you can tell the 2 days I read the vampire books in one sitting, because I don't normally read that much in one day. But yeah, that's me, and I'm hoping June continues to be a good reading month for me. I'm kind of on a roll. I was in a wee reading slump not too long ago, and I feel like I'm finally past that hurdle. Yeah, so let me know what you think of what I've read, and if you've got any recommendations, and let's have a little chat down in the comments. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.